Amanda had been preparing for this moment for months, 3 tiny heartbeats growing inside her, each with a name, a room, a future. As she was wheeled into the delivery room, the medical team moved with calm precision, and everything unfolded as expected. 3 babies were born healthy and strong. Relief filled the air. But then, as part of routine post-delivery checks, one final ultrasound was performed. And that's when everything changed. What the doctor saw on the screen made him go pale. Seconds later, he dropped the probe and ran out of the room screaming, leaving the entire team frozen. In panic, what could possibly terrify an experienced physician in the middle of a maternity ward? Before we dive into this gripping story, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. And if you enjoy stories that move you, shock you, and stay with you, don't forget to like and subscribe to Mr. Edward's Tales, where you feel the true emotion of stories that make you reflect on life. Amanda sat in the passenger seat of the car, hands resting gently over her swollen belly as the city's skyline gave way to the hospital buildings. Her husband, Daniel, drove in silence, glancing over at her every so often. "Nervous?" he asked, keeping his tone light. Amanda nodded without speaking. It wasn't the first time she felt this sense of unease, but she brushed it off like she'd done throughout the pregnancy. "Just want to make sure everything's okay," she finally said, rubbing a circular motion on her abdomen. She was carrying 3 babies, 2 boys and 1 girl. And even though all the checkups had been relatively smooth, the thought of being outnumbered by tiny humans weighed heavily on her. "It's the last ultrasound," Daniel reminded her. "Then it's go time." His words were meant to reassure, but Amanda just smiled faintly. At the hospital entrance, a nurse recognized them immediately and greeted them warmly. "Almost there, Mama," she said, helping Amanda into the wheelchair. "We've got you." Amanda tried to match her enthusiasm, but couldn't shake the heaviness in her chest. It was irrational, maybe even hormonal, but still, the feeling clung to her like a shadow. Inside the ultrasound room, the technician applied the familiar cold gel to Amanda's abdomen and began scanning. The screen lit up with grainy images of the 3 babies, their heartbeats clearly visible and strong. Amanda watched quietly, her eyes fixed on the flickering monitor as if searching for hidden messages in the patterns. The technician smiled. "They're all still behaving. You've got a lively crew in there." Amanda chuckled weakly. Dr. Elias, the obstetrician who had accompanied her through the entire pregnancy, walked in with his usual confident stride. "Let's have a look," he said, taking over the probe and adjusting the angles. "Baby A, baby B, baby C, all present, all active, all heartbeats strong. No signs of stress. Fluid levels look good." He listed off the vitals like a checklist, tapping the screen with his pen. Amanda and Daniel exchanged a look of cautious relief. "So, we're good to go?" Amanda asked, her voice tight with anticipation. Dr. Elias nodded. "Yes, I'd like to schedule you for admission tonight to induce labor, your full term, and with triplets, it's better we don't wait too long." Amanda exhaled audibly, and Daniel squeezed her hand. Still, the knot in her stomach refused to unravel. The room emptied quickly after that. The technician wiped Amanda's belly clean and offered a congratulatory smile before leaving. Daniel helped her sit up slowly, her body already aching under the weight of the pregnancy. "Tonight," he whispered, half in awe, half in disbelief. Amanda forced a smile. "Tonight." As they walked back toward the main lobby, she felt a subtle throb in her lower back, sharp enough to make her pause. Daniel noticed immediately. "Contraction?" he asked. She shook her head. "Just a twinge." Still, he hovered close, watching her. Like a hawk. The elevator ride felt unusually long, and Amanda leaned against the mirrored wall, studying her reflection. She looked tired, yes, but also different. She placed her hand on the side of her belly, where baby C usually kicked. No movement at that moment, which wasn't necessarily alarming, but it was enough to make her pulse quicken. "I'm just being paranoid," she muttered. "You're being cautious," Daniel replied. "That's not a bad thing." She nodded again, but the dread returned, threading its way back into her thoughts. For the rest of the day, it would sit there, quietly, ignored, but not forgotten. Later, in the pre-admission office, Amanda filled out the final forms while Daniel handled the insurance information. The receptionist handed them a packet with the hospital map and induction instructions. Head straight to the maternity floor at 7 p.m. tonight, she said. Amanda thanked her politely, clutching the papers as if they contained something sacred. On the way out, they passed a row of new parents cradling their newborns behind the nursery glass. Amanda stopped to look. Some babies were crying, some sleeping, others blinking wide-eyed at the world. They'd just entered. Her eyes welled with tears unexpectedly. "In a few hours, that'll be us," Daniel murmured. She nodded, but didn't speak. As they exited into the parking lot, Amanda froze suddenly, one hand grabbing Daniel's arm. "There it is again," she whispered. "That feeling, like something's missing." Daniel looked at her with concern, then down at her belly. "You sure it's not nerves?" She hesitated before answering. "I don't know anymore." Back home, Amanda tried to rest before the evening admission, but her mind refused to quiet. She lay on the couch, surrounded by neatly packed baby bags, sterilized bottles, and folded blankets. Everything was ready. Everything was supposed to be ready. Daniel was in the kitchen preparing a quick dinner, but Amanda couldn't eat. She kept replaying the ultrasound in her head. The babies looked fine. Everything was fine. But there was, something about Dr. Elias's tone. Too rehearsed? Too confident? She shook her head, scolding herself for overthinking. "You're just scared," she whispered. "That's all." Yet as her eyes closed briefly, she had a flicker of an image that she couldn't explain. Darkness, like a space left unlit, and a heartbeat, faint but real, pulsing from somewhere deep and unseen. Amanda opened her eyes wide and sat up quickly, her breath shallow. "It's just the anxiety," she told herself, but this time she didn't believe it. At 6:45 p.m., Amanda and Daniel were back in the hospital, being escorted to the maternity ward. The nurse greeted them warmly and led them into a large room prepared for induction. "We'll start with the IV soon," she said. "Try to relax. It'll all go smoothly." Amanda nodded, though her fingers gripped the blanket tightly. Daniel unpacked their overnight bag and plugged in Amanda's phone. She glanced at the screen. No messages, no missed calls, but a strange wave of sadness washed over her. Something was trying to get her attention. She felt it. "You okay?" Daniel asked. Amanda didn't answer immediately. Then she turned to him, her expression unreadable. "If anything feels wrong tonight, promise me you'll listen, even if I can't explain it." Daniel looked confused but nodded. "Of course." Amanda laid back on the bed, staring up at the ceiling tiles. Something about the sterile lights made her skin prickle. The night had just begun, and something deep inside her was preparing for more than childbirth. Something buried, something waiting. Amanda's first contraction hit at 2:27 a.m., a sharp, cramping pressure that spread across her abdomen like a slow wave. She had been trying to sleep, but her restlessness had already kept her on edge. The pain startled her, forcing her upright in the hospital bed. "Daniel!" she called out, gripping the side rail. He had been dozing in the chair beside her, but he jumped up instantly. "Contraction?" he asked, blinking away sleep. She nodded, breathing deeply. Stronger than the others, and longer. Within minutes, the nurses were in the room, monitors were connected, and the fetal heart rates were charted on multiple screens. "You're in early labor," the on-call midwife confirmed. "But with triplets, we'll move quickly. Let's call Dr. Elias." Amanda's pulse quickened. She looked at Daniel, who took her hand and squeezed it firmly. "We've got this," he said. But even he looked a little pale. The room, once quiet, buzzed with motion. Amanda focused on her breathing, but every sound, the beeping monitors, the rolling carts, the sterile snap of gloves, echoed louder than it should. She wasn't just nervous, she was terrified, but there was no turning back. By 4:12 a.m., Amanda was fully and dilated. The contractions had become unbearable, rolling one after another with barely time to recover. The decision had been made for a vaginal birth, monitored closely by a team of 2 OBs, a neonatologist, and 5 nurses. The delivery suite had been converted into a miniature operating room, with incubators waiting by the wall, heat lamps already glowing. Amanda gritted her teeth as the pressure in her pelvis intensified. Daniel remained at her side, whispering encouragements, brushing the hair from her sweat-soaked forehead. "First baby's crowning," Dr. Elias announced, his voice clear but urgent. "Amanda, I need you to push with everything you've got." Amanda let out a guttural cry and bore down. With a final surge of effort, the first baby, a boy, slid into the doctor's hands. The cries that followed were thin, but strong. The baby was quickly taken to the neonatal team. "One down, 2 to go," someone said. Amanda was barely able to breathe before the second wave came. Again she pushed, muscles screaming. The second baby, a girl, arrived minutes later, her tiny lungs announcing her presence to the room. Amanda gasped and reached toward the sound, tears mixing with sweat. She wanted to hold them, but she still wasn't done. The third baby arrived after a slightly longer struggle. Amanda's strength was waning, and her body felt like it was unraveling. "You're doing incredible," Daniel whispered, holding her shoulder as she trembled. The pressure returned, and Amanda screamed, overwhelmed. The medical team urged her through the final push, and finally, baby C, a boy, emerged. The entire room exhaled. Dr. Elias confirmed all 3 were stable and breathing, though their sizes varied. The nurses quickly wrapped each newborn and transported them to the neonatal station. Amanda collapsed back against the pillows, her face streaked with tears and exhaustion. "You did it," Daniel whispered, placing a kiss on her forehead. She tried to smile, but her lips quivered. "Are they okay?" she asked. "They're perfect," he answered. The midwife confirmed the placentas were delivered cleanly, and there was no sign of retained tissue or hemorrhage. Amanda, dazed, felt like she was floating between consciousness and sleep. But somewhere beneath the euphoria, that strange unease from before still lingered, muted, but not gone. As Amanda was cleaned up and prepared for recovery, the babies were placed in separate warmers, each being monitored carefully. Amanda tried to track their movements with her eyes, her vision blurred from the exhaustion. "Can I see them?" she asked weakly. "Soon," the nurse replied gently. "We just need to finish their assessments first." Daniel stood between the babies and Amanda, glancing back and forth with a kind of stunned joy. "They all have your nose," he joked softly, trying to lighten the moment. Amanda chuckled faintly, but then she turned her head and stared at the ceiling. 3 heartbeats, she whispered to herself, echoing the reassurance she'd heard for months. 3 babies. But why, even in this moment of triumph, did she feel like something was missing? She tried to shake the thought. She blamed the drugs, the adrenaline, the physical shock. "You're tired," she told herself. "That's all." Yet as they wheeled her out of the delivery room and toward post-op, Amanda glanced back one last time. The machines, the cords, the tiny swaddled infants. It was all real. And still, her heart beat faster than it should. Something inside her wasn't ready to rest. In the recovery suite, Amanda was finally allowed to hold each of the babies briefly. A nurse placed the first son in her arms, and Amanda wept quietly as she gazed at his tiny, perfect face. Then came the daughter, swaddled in a pink-striped blanket, her eyes barely open. Lastly, the smaller of the boys, who cooed softly as Amanda kissed his forehead. "Hi," she whispered to each one, her voice cracked and hoarse. "Hi, my loves." Daniel hovered close, holding his phone to snap a picture. The nurse took one of the 3 of them together, Amanda, tired and radiant, cradling her 3 newborns. "You're officially outnumbered," he said, with a grin. Amanda smiled, but deep in her chest, the same weight returned. It didn't make sense. She had everything. The babies were here. The journey was supposed to be over. Yet her instincts refused to settle. She closed her eyes, trying to embrace the joy fully, but a single word floated through her thoughts like a whisper: incomplete. Outside the room, the neonatal team was preparing the initial evaluation reports. One nurse, glancing back over the delivery notes, furrowed her brow. "You ever seen triplets spaced like that?" she asked her colleague. Baby A and B were a minute apart. Baby C took longer. The other nurse shrugged. "Happens sometimes. Maybe positioning." But the first nurse hesitated, looking again at the scan printouts. "Just feels off, like something didn't match the prenatal records exactly." Before she could say more, the door opened and she was called away. Unaware of the quiet doubts forming among the staff, Amanda drifted into a light sleep. Babies in the nursery, Daniel by her side, and a truth, still hidden, waiting in silence for its moment. The sun had barely begun to rise, casting a soft orange hue across the maternity wing, when the postpartum protocol team entered Amanda's recovery room. She was groggy, eyelids heavy from the cocktail of painkillers and fatigue, but lucid enough to respond with a weak nod when the attending nurse mentioned the final verification ultrasound. "Standard procedure," she said gently, "just to make sure your uterus has contracted well and that nothing was retained." Amanda didn't protest. She was still in the haze of birth, her thoughts drifting between her 3 newborns and the dull ache in her abdomen. Daniel, who hadn't left her side all night, offered a reassuring smile. "They're just double-checking, love. Routine stuff," he said. Amanda tried to mirror his calmness, but something about the term double-checking made her skin prickle. She turned her head slightly and stared at the white ceiling tiles, letting her mind wander as they prepped the portable ultrasound machine. The same machine that, hours earlier, had confirmed everything was as expected, or so they had thought. Dr. Healy, a younger obstetrician filling in for Dr. Elias during the morning rounds, entered the room with an air of polite efficiency. "Good morning, Amanda. I know you're exhausted, but this'll only take a few minutes," he said. Amanda nodded again. He applied the gel to her abdomen with practiced care and began scanning, his eyes trained on the screen. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of the machine and the rhythmic clicking of keys as the nurse documented vitals. At first, everything looked as it should. The uterus was contracting well, and the fluid levels were diminishing as expected. Dr. Healy marked a few notes, adjusted the probe slightly, and then paused, his eyebrows knit together in a subtle but unmistakable shift. He zoomed in, adjusted the angle again, and stared more intently. Amanda, sensing a change, broke the silence. "Is everything okay?" she asked. Dr. Healy didn't respond immediately. Instead, he motioned for the lights to be dimmed slightly and increased the contrast on the monitor. "Probably just residual tissue," he muttered, half to himself. But Amanda heard the uncertainty. Daniel stood up, tension rising in his shoulders. "Doctor, what's going on?" Dr. Healy kept scanning, now methodically moving the probe in slow arcs across Amanda's lower abdomen. "I'm seeing something at the base of the uterus, posterior wall," he said, his tone more clinical now. "Could be retained placenta, or maybe a clot, but—" he trailed off. Daniel moved behind him, trying to get a glimpse of the screen. Amanda's heart began to race, her breath quickening. "But what?" she pressed. Dr. Healy hesitated, then finally looked up. "There's something irregular. A mass, possibly. But here, watch." He pointed to the screen, isolating the fuzzy shape. At first it looked like a shadow, non-threatening, just part of the uterine lining maybe. But then, as he held the probe steady, the shape twitched. Amanda flinched. Daniel leaned closer. Did that move?" he asked. Dr. Healy didn't answer. He simply stared, watching the monitor with growing unease. The nurse glanced at him, eyebrows raised. "Do you want me to call imaging?" she asked. "And Elias?" Dr. Healy nodded slowly, not taking his eyes off the screen. "Yes, get them both. Now." The room that had been calm only minutes earlier now brimmed with quiet tension. Amanda tried to lift her head but felt lightheaded. "Tell me," she demanded, voice trembling. Dr. Healy looked over at her, trying to stay composed. "There's a structure in your uterus that shouldn't be there. It could be a clot or calcified tissue, but I saw what looked like movement. It's too early to jump to conclusions, but we need to take a closer look." Amanda blinked rapidly, her throat tightening. "Movement?" she echoed. "Like a heartbeat?" He didn't respond directly. "Let's not speculate yet," he said instead, which only amplified her dread. The nurse returned with a more senior radiologist, and moments later, Dr. Elias entered with his lab coat still unbuttoned and dark circles under his eyes. "What's going on?" he asked briskly. Dr. Healy stepped aside and replayed the ultrasound loop. Dr. Elias studied the screen in silence, then leaned forward, narrowing his gaze. "Zoom in here," he said, pointing to the lower quadrant of the screen. The radiologist adjusted the controls. The grainy image flickered, then sharpened, just enough to catch it again. A subtle, shuddering movement inside the supposed mass. Not a flutter, not gas. Intentional motion. "Run a transvaginal scan," Dr. Elias ordered, voice low and serious. The nurse wheeled in the equipment while Amanda's eyes welled with tears. "Tell me what that is," she whispered. "Please." Dr. Elias softened his voice, approaching the bed. "Amanda, this is extremely rare, but we're considering the possibility that there may be a fourth gestational sac, isolated and undetected." Daniel let out a stunned exhale. "Another baby?" he asked, almost laughing. From disbelief. How could that be possible? After all the ultrasounds? The radiologist chimed in. "It may be a secondary uterine cavity, or some form of encapsulated gestation, like an intrauterine twin that didn't present with the others." Amanda's mind reeled. But why no heartbeat before? Why? "No signs," Dr. Elias answered carefully. "If the fetus was trapped in a separate compartment, it could have been obscured, especially if growth was minimal, or if it remained inactive during imaging." Amanda's whole body trembled. "Is it alive?" she asked, voice cracking. No one answered. They began the transvaginal scan, dimming the room again as the screen filled with deeper, more defined images. Everyone in the room went still as the probe passed over the area in question. Then, unmistakably, a movement, more distinct now, a curled limb, a shifting torso, and suddenly, faint but undeniable, the high, pulsing of a heartbeat. The radiologist leaned forward. "It's there," she confirmed. "There's something viable." Amanda let out a sob she hadn't realized she was holding in. Daniel sat down, stunned. "Is it really a baby?" Amanda asked again. Dr. Elias nodded slowly. "It appears so." The silence that followed was almost reverent, like the moment before a storm, before a miracle, or both. Amanda placed her hand over her belly, even though she knew it was mostly empty now. "I felt it," she said softly. "I knew something was missing." Dr. Elias turned to the team. "Prep for immediate imaging, and contact neonatal surgery." Then he looked at Amanda. "We don't have much time, but we may have one more life to save." Dr. Elias leaned closer to the monitor, squinting as he adjusted the focus manually, not trusting the auto-resolution. The room was already tense, the silence interrupted only by the soft, rhythmic beeping of the machines. His fingers hesitated over the control dial for a fraction of a second before turning it again, just enough to sharpen the resolution one last time. The image that emerged on the screen was clearer than before, hauntingly so. Inside the separate cavity that had only moments earlier been a mystery lay a small figure, curled in a tight fetal position. It was unmistakably human. The proportions were miniature, the limbs frail and compressed, but the features were there. A head, a tiny chest. What sent chills down Elias's spine, however, was the fact that while the fetus showed no typical fetal movement, there was an unmistakable flutter deep within the chest. Cavity, an irregular but visible pulse, a heartbeat. He froze, stunned. A fourth fetus, not theoretical anymore, not a shadow or a misread image. It was there, real, living, and it had been missed for the entirety of Amanda's pregnancy. Elias's breath caught in his throat. A cold sweat broke out along his forehead. He looked around, but no one else seemed to fully grasp the gravity of what had just been confirmed. The young nurse to his right glanced at the screen, but said nothing, waiting for his next move. The technician stood back, hands clasped nervously. Elias opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. The pressure of responsibility, of disbelief, of scientific impossibility stared back at him in grayscale on the monitor. He stepped back suddenly, heart racing, and the ultrasound wand slipped from his grip, landing on the sterile tray with a loud clatter. Everyone flinched. Without a word, Elias turned and stumbled out of the room, his lab coat swinging behind him. The echo of his footsteps in the tiled hallway grew louder, until, just outside the maternity suite, he let out a choked, almost primal scream. "We missed it! My God! We missed a baby!" The cry reverberated. Down the corridor like a siren, the nurses on call stood frozen. A doctor poked his head out of a nearby room, startled, and within seconds, the floor erupted into chaos. Inside the exam room, the team stood in stunned confusion. The screen was still displaying the image of the motionless fetus, and Amanda, groggy but conscious, could feel the shift in atmosphere. "What's happening?" she asked, eyes darting between the faces around her. No one gave a clear answer. A nurse rushed to retrieve the ultrasound wand, trying to replicate the image. The probe was cold against Amanda's skin again, but she didn't flinch. Her heart pounded in her ears. "Somebody tell me what's going on," she demanded. The technician, pale and shaky, spoke softly. "There's something more. Another baby. We think it's alive." Amanda's eyes widened. She turned toward Daniel, who had gone pale himself. "A fourth?" he whispered. "But that's not possible, right?" Amanda said nothing. Deep down, it was as if she had been waiting to hear those words. All the anxiety, the strange weight in her chest. It hadn't been paranoia. It had been truth, buried under layers of medical oversight. "Where is it?" she asked. "Why, didn't they see it before?" No one could answer. Out in the hallway, Elias was pacing like a man possessed. 2 staff members approached him cautiously. "Doctor, are you okay? Do you need to sit down?" one asked. He shook his head violently. "No time for that. We need imaging, full-body MRI. Prep an emergency surgical suite. Call the neonatal ICU now." The staff exchanged worried glances but obeyed. The floor nurse radioed for the transport team, and a gurney was dispatched to Amanda's room. By the time Elias re-entered, he was flushed and breathing heavily, but composed enough to speak. "Amanda," he said, kneeling slightly to meet her gaze. "We believe you have a 4th fetus. Somehow it developed in a separate compartment, undetected. It's alive, but we don't know for how long. We need to operate." Amanda stared at him, barely processing the words. Daniel gripped her hand. "Do what you have to," he said, voice tight with fear. Amanda nodded slowly. "Just save my baby," she whispered. In less than 15 minutes, Amanda was prepped for emergency surgery. The surgical team had never performed anything quite like this. The neonatal specialists waited with tension just outside the OR, fully aware that every second could mean the difference between life and death for the mysterious 4th child. Inside the room, Amanda was sedated and intubated. The monitors were calibrated. The incision was mapped. Dr. Elias, now scrubbed in and steady-handed, took one last look at the ultrasound screen mounted beside the operating table. The fetus was still unmoving, but that tiny, persistent heartbeat pulsed on, defiant. As the first incision was made, he murmured under his breath, "Don't give up on us." The team worked in silence, aware that they were no longer just correcting an error. They were unraveling a medical anomaly no textbook had prepared them for. Outside the OR, the hospital administrator arrived, having been alerted by staff about the strange outburst and the emergency procedure. He pulled Elias's assistant aside. "You said the baby was missed on every scan?" he asked. She nodded. "All the records showed 3. Every single one." The administrator frowned, already imagining the press inquiries, the legal implications, the ethics board. "Let's pray for a miracle," he said grimly. Back inside, the surgery was underway. Amanda's body trembled under the lights. The atmosphere was thick with tension, and in that moment, in a womb that had hidden its secret so well for so long, a 4th heart continued to beat, quiet, waiting, hoping not to be forgotten. As the surgical lights flickered on and the operating team completed preparations, a calm but commanding presence entered the room. Dr. Lionel Mendez, a fetal medicine specialist called in from a neighboring university hospital. His reputation for handling the rarest and most complex prenatal anomalies had preceded him. Dressed in sterile surgical attire and flanked by his assistant, he was ushered immediately to the imaging console, where the transvaginal ultrasound footage was still paused on the frame showing the mysterious 4th fetus. "Show me the live feed," he instructed, voice composed and low. The technician obliged, and within moments the grainy motion reappeared. Dr. Mendez stood in silent observation for nearly 2 full minutes, arms crossed, eyes narrowing. His silence unnerved the already anxious team. Then, without breaking his gaze, he spoke. "This isn't a retained twin. We're looking at a rare case of heterotopic gestation." The room went still. "But the 3 viable births were all intrauterine," a nurse replied. Dr. Mendez nodded. "Yes, and this one likely is too, but isolated, either within a second uterine cavity or sealed in a fibrous sac, possibly encapsulated. It's extraordinary and urgent." Dr. Elias leaned in. "Viable?" he asked. Dr. Mendez exhaled slowly. "The heartbeat is weak, but it's there. That alone warrants intervention. We may be dealing with a secondary amniotic compartment, either from a Mullerian anomaly or, less likely, a failed twin-to-twin fusion early in gestation. He turned to Amanda, still conscious under mild sedation and oxygen support. Her eyes fluttered open briefly as she registered the unfamiliar voice. "You're going to help my baby?" she whispered, voice raspy. Dr. Mendez nodded. "We're going to try, Amanda. But I must be honest, it's going to be delicate. Extremely so." Daniel, standing just behind the curtain divider, gripped the metal rail of Amanda's bed. "What are the risks?" he asked. "Hemorrhage, uterine rupture, fetal demise. But also," Mendez paused, softening his tone, "hope. And you don't ignore that." Amanda gave a barely perceptible nod. That was all the team needed. The decision was made. Dr. Mendez stepped forward, took a deep breath, and began the preoperative briefing to the staff. "This is no longer a standard postpartum complication," he said. "We are attempting to save a life that should never have gone undetected." Within minutes, Amanda was fully anesthetized, and the surgical drapes were placed. The overhead cameras began recording, both for documentation and potential study. The OR had become a battlefield of precision. Dr. Mendez operated with a near-surgical trance, his hands moving with the steady pace of someone who had trained for the improbable. "We'll approach through the lower uterine segment," he said, avoiding the area of the prior placental attachment. "Be ready for vascular control." The assisting OB handed him a fine scalpel, and the first incision was made. The silence in the room was almost sacred. Each layer of tissue revealed new obstacles: adhesions from the recent birth, pockets of retained fluid, tension in the myometrium. And then, Dr. Mendez paused. "There," he said quietly. "Posterior wall. There's a fibrotic membrane." With great care, he dissected around the perimeter. Beneath it, a sac appeared, tenuous and opaque, like mist inside a bubble. "Suction on standby," he ordered. "We're going in." The team held their breath. A final incision, and the sac deflated slowly, revealing a curled, motionless infant, paler and smaller than the others, but undeniably alive. The neonatologist stepped forward instantly. "We have a pulse," she confirmed after placing the monitor. "Faint, but present." The baby's limbs were drawn close to its body, as though protecting itself from the light and noise of this sudden world. Dr. Mendez gently transferred the newborn into the waiting warmer while the team moved into overdrive. Oxygen, thermal regulation, immediate APGAR assessment. Gestational lag of approximately 3 weeks, the neonatologist estimated. Malnourished, but no obvious malformations. Amanda remained unconscious, unaware of the successful extraction that had just unfolded. Daniel stood stunned behind the window, watching as his fourth child, a child they hadn't known existed only hours before, struggled to cry. When the sound finally came, weak and scratchy, he broke into tears. Dr. Elias placed a hand on his shoulder. "He made it," he said quietly. "He's here." Daniel nodded, unable to speak. The hallway outside the OR slowly filled with whispers. Nurses wept silently. A surgical tech crossed herself. In all their careers, none had seen anything like this. A pregnancy within a pregnancy. A hidden life saved in the 11th hour. While the surgical team began suturing Amanda's uterus with meticulous care, Dr. Mendez took a moment to examine the extracted cavity more closely. "There was a complete encapsulation," he said, pointing to the thickened membrane. "This sac didn't interact with the others, completely isolated, like a biological afterthought." The room remained quiet, all eyes on the surgical field. "If the placenta had begun calcifying," the neonatologist added, "we might have lost him within hours." Amanda's vitals stabilized, and the final sutures were completed. The staff began cleanup procedures, but the emotional weight of what had transpired lingered thick in the air. Dr. Mendez removed his gloves and stared down at the child, now being stabilized in the NICU incubator. "He survived," he said softly, almost in disbelief. "Despite every missed scan, every assumption, every rule of probability, he survived." It was not just a medical victory. It was a story that would be studied, cited, and remembered. But more than that, it was a miracle that had arrived quietly, wrapped in silence, hiding in plain sight. Back in recovery, Amanda slowly began to stir. The anesthetic haze receded like fog lifting from a field. Her lips parted. "Is it over?" she asked. Daniel leaned down beside her and kissed her forehead. "Yes," he whispered. "And he's alive." Amanda blinked up at him. "He?" she repeated. "It's a boy?" Daniel nodded, still trembling. "They saved him, the fourth. You were right all along." Amanda closed her eyes, a tear slipping down her cheek. I felt it. I knew he was. The machines beeped softly around them, and somewhere in the distance, 4 infants breathed in rhythm. The beginning of a new life, multiplied by 4, and united by something greater than biology. Survival, hope, and the quiet certainty that even when unseen, life finds a way. The surgical room remained in a reverent hush, the air thick with the kind of weight that only accompanies something sacred or utterly unbelievable. The fourth baby, smaller, pale, and underdeveloped, had just been lifted from the hidden compartment in Amanda's uterus, a space no scan had detected, no doctor had expected, and no protocol had prepared them for. The infant's limbs were curled tightly toward its body, skin nearly translucent, veins faintly visible beneath the surface. He didn't cry at first. His tiny chest quivered with shallow effort, and for a moment, the room held its collective breath, waiting for a sound, a gasp, any sign of will to live. The neonatologist leaned in, positioning a stethoscope over the infant's chest, her gloved hands surprisingly steady. "Faint heartbeat. He's bradycardic, but it's there," she announced. With one swift motion, she handed him off to the NICU team waiting just outside the surgical door. "Move. Let's get him on oxygen and under heat stat." A nurse whisked the baby away in an incubator, running alongside the team as they rushed him into the neonatal intensive care unit. Behind them, the door slowly swung shut, leaving behind stunned silence. Dr. Elias took a long breath and turned his attention back to Amanda's open abdomen, now being closed carefully by Dr. Mendez and the assisting OB. The procedure had lasted over an hour, but it felt like mere minutes to those inside. Every face in the room bore the imprint of awe, eyes wide, brows furrowed, mouths pressed into silent disbelief. "This changes everything," the anesthesiologist muttered under his breath. Every scan, every chart said 3. Another nurse, shaken, leaned against the wall, her hands clasped over her mask. "I've been in obstetrics for 15 years, she whispered, "and I've never seen anything like this." Dr. Mendez didn't speak. He simply nodded, his expression unreadable, eyes still focused on the suturing work. The pressure of precision had not left his body. There was no margin for error now, not after witnessing a living infant that medicine had utterly failed to acknowledge for 9 months. Dr. Elias finally broke the silence. "Let's finish this," he said firmly. "She needs to wake up to all 4 of them breathing." In the NICU, the atmosphere was the opposite of the calm, methodical OR. It was tense, urgent, and filled, with clinical murmurs layered with emotion. The baby, now referred to as Baby D in hospital records, was placed under a radiant warmer, electrodes gently attached to his tiny chest. His weight was significantly lower than his siblings, his frame almost skeletal compared to what would be expected. At full term, gestational lag is around 3 to 4 weeks, the attending neonatologist confirmed. Signs of intrauterine growth restriction. He was surviving on minimal resources. A respiratory therapist adjusted the CPAP unit over the baby's delicate face. The machine let out a soft hiss as oxygen flooded his lungs, and after several agonizing seconds, the baby let out a broken, crackling whimper. It wasn't a full cry, but it was enough. Enough to cause a nurse nearby to turn away and wipe her eyes. "Come on, little guy," she whispered, as if willing his will to live into existence. Monitors lit up with slow, climbing vitals. The baby's oxygen saturation increased. His body, no longer curled so tightly, began to relax under the warmth and care he had been so long denied. Meanwhile, the hospital was already buzzing with internal alerts. Reports of the 4th, hidden baby had reached administrative channels, and doctors from other departments had begun to quietly filter toward the NICU to confirm the rumors. A supervisor from pediatrics stood behind the glass, arms crossed, disbelief etched into every line of his face. "There's no precedent for this," he said. "None." Another physician, scanning through Amanda's ultrasound records on a tablet, shook her head. Every file confirms only 3 fetuses, every angle, every trimester. Someone muttered, "It's a miracle he's alive." But even that word felt too small. It wasn't just a miracle. It was a systemic blind spot, a medical mystery, something that shouldn't have happened, but had. And in the middle of all the discussion, the baby lay there, tethered to life by machines, tubes, and the unwavering focus of a team now united by the unthinkable. Every beep of the monitor was a promise. He is here now, back. In recovery, Amanda stirred again, the effects of anesthesia beginning to lift more noticeably. Her lashes fluttered, and she exhaled deeply. Daniel, who hadn't left her bedside, immediately leaned forward. "Amanda," he whispered. "Hey, you're awake." Her voice came in a hoarse murmur. "The baby. Did they get him out?" Daniel nodded, his voice breaking. "Yes, he's alive. He's small, but he's fighting." Amanda's eyes filled with tears before she even processed the words. "I knew it," she choked. "All those months I felt him. I knew I wasn't wrong." She turned her face toward him as if needing to hear him confirm it again. "He's real." Daniel placed his forehead against hers. "He's real. Our 4th baby is real." They both began to cry, quietly, privately. It was a grief and a joy intertwined. Grief for the near loss, for the months of silence and invisibility, and joy for the heartbeat they almost never got to hear. As the day shifted into evening, the hospital began preparing for the media frenzy they suspected was inevitable. Staff members who had assisted in the delivery were discreetly interviewed for internal reports, and security was quietly increased in the NICU area. But behind the scenes, in the quiet room where Amanda lay surrounded by the gentle hum of monitors and Daniel's protective presence, a different kind of preparation was taking place. The nurse entered, holding a photo taken just an hour earlier. It showed 4 incubators, side by side. 3 of the babies looked robust, swaddled, and pink. The 4th was small, almost ghostly in contrast. "But they're all stable for now," the nurse said softly. Amanda reached for the photo, her fingers trembling. She traced the tiny face of baby D with her thumb and whispered, You waited for us to find you." And in that moment, though still separated by glass, wires, and uncertainty, she became the mother of 4. 4 days after the emergency surgery that saved the life of the hidden 4th baby, Amanda was finally strong enough to leave the ICU. Her body was still weak, stitched with pain, but her soul carried something else entirely, a wholeness she hadn't expected to feel. As nurses wheeled her slowly through the corridor toward the private maternity room prepared for her, she clutched a photograph close to her chest, the one showing all 4 incubators aligned side by side. The image had become her anchor during those long hours apart from her babies. Daniel walked beside her, his hand resting protectively on her shoulder. Neither spoke much during the transfer. Words felt too small for the scope of what they had lived. Amanda had endured childbirth, surgery, trauma, and something sacred, something unexplainable. And now she was about to meet her children, not as patients separated by glass and wires, but as their mother, ready to hold them for the first time all together. As the doors opened and the light spilled into the room, Amanda's breath caught in her throat. Inside, 3 nurses were already preparing the babies for skin-to-skin contact. Each child had gained weight and shown signs of steady progress, especially the smallest one. Baby D, as he was still labeled on his NICU band, had defied all expectations. His vitals had stabilized, his breathing had improved, and he'd begun to nurse with assistance just hours earlier. "He's a fighter," the lead nurse had said. "That one came into this world with a mission." Amanda's eyes went immediately to the warmer where he lay. He looked impossibly small, but less fragile than before. His limbs had relaxed. His complexion was fuller, flushed with the warmth of oxygen and life. Amanda reached for him first. The nurses guided her arms gently, and when the baby was placed against her chest, everything else vanished. The beeping machines, the sterile lighting, the pain in her abdomen, it all disappeared. She sobbed openly, cradling him to her heart as he squirmed softly and settled into the rhythm of her breath. "You waited for me," she whispered, "and I'm here now." One by one, the other 3 babies were brought to her. Baby A, the oldest, already had a fierce little grip and a strong cry. Baby B, the only girl, was serene and observant, her tiny eyes blinking with uncanny focus. Baby C, who'd taken longest to be born, nestled quietly into Amanda's elbow like he'd always belonged there. And there, nestled above them all, was the fourth, the miracle child. No name yet, though Amanda had already begun forming a list. For now, she simply called him Hope. Around her, the nurses observed in silence, visibly moved. Daniel stepped behind her and wrapped his arms around her shoulders from behind, his chin resting lightly against her temple. "Look at them," he said, voice breaking. 4 hearts, 1 miracle. Amanda closed her eyes, letting the warmth of her children bleed into her bones. She had never imagined this ending, never prepared for it. But now that it was here, she couldn't imagine anything else. The hospital couldn't contain the story for long. By the end of the week, it had made national headlines. Mother gives birth to triplets. Then doctors discover hidden 4th baby during postpartum scan, read one article. Another dubbed it a medical anomaly that stunned the world. Amanda and Daniel were approached by reporters, researchers, and even documentary producers. The hospital arranged press statements, carefully scripted and supervised. Medical journals reached out to Dr. Mendez for case studies. The term encapsulated 4th gestation trended briefly on medical forums. For most, the story was a fascinating oddity, an intersection of science and mystery. But for Amanda, it was never about anomalies or headlines. She smiled politely during interviews, answered questions graciously, but each time someone called it a miracle, she wanted to say something different. He wasn't hidden by chance, she would think. He wasn't lost. He was just waiting to be seen. But how do you explain a mother's knowing? A silence that wasn't absence but presence in disguise. As the babies were discharged, first the older 3, and then finally baby D, a full week later, Amanda stood at the hospital exit with all 4 in her arms, flanked by Daniel, family, and teary-eyed nurses who had followed every moment of the journey. The parking lot outside was lit with soft spring light, and Amanda paused at the doors, overwhelmed. "Ready?" Daniel asked. Amanda nodded. More than ever. They walked out together, pushing the stroller built for 3, but now modified to hold 4. A nurse chuckled through her tears. "We'll have to invent a new category for you," she joked. But Amanda was no longer surprised by the impossible. She had carried it for months. She had bled for it. She had wept for it. And now, she was holding it in her arms. That night, in the quiet of their home, Amanda lay in bed with all 4 cribs lined up at the foot of her mattress. She had refused to let the babies sleep apart from her, even temporarily. She dozed lightly, waking with every breath, every rustle. And then, in the dark, she reached for the smallest one, Hope. She lifted him gently and placed him against her chest. "You were never forgotten," she whispered. "Not by me." Outside, the world buzzed with speculation, headlines, and scientific debate. But inside that room, it was simpler. A mother who had always known, a baby who had always existed, and a bond that had defied every scan and every rule. 4 hearts now beat in sync, but one of them had waited longer, waited to be loved, waited to be found. And Amanda knew, with unshakable certainty, that he had been there all along, silent, invisible, and destined. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to Mr. Edward's Tales for more true stories that inspire and move. Leave a like, tell us in the comments what you thought, and share this video with someone who needs to see it. See you in the next tale.